You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
Alrighty, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and I'm joined, as always, by your co-hosts, Kevin and Alex. Gentlemen, how are we doing this evening?
I'm doing good. I have a problem, and we were talking about this before the show. I have started my first draft for next season already. So, yes, I have a problem, and we're gonna see how this shakes out. But really, what a great weekend! Like the conference championship games were just as exciting as the divisional round games, and the only difference, we only had 2 games instead of 4, but great games. The competition was clearly neck and neck, as we have more 3-point games in the playoffs, and what a fun way to spend a Sunday if you're a football fan. The NFL couldn't be happier with how the playoffs have shaken out as far as the competitiveness of these games. It may not have been the 2 teams that they necessarily wanted in there if you put a gun to their head, but the fact that all these close games and the grittiness and just the big time players showing up in big time moments, they really couldn't be happier with what they've seen so far in the playoffs this year.
I think with the teams that they got, right, obviously I think this is a huge justified we were right to let the Rams leave St. Louis. We were right to get into the LA market mindset by the NFL, because now not only are they having a Super Bowl in LA, but you've got one of the teams that's, that calls that place home playing there. So I think that the NFL is probably, super ecstatic about, getting into that market, or getting back into that market, I should say. And then what better way to celebrate, that business decision than by showcasing it, on the grandest stage that you possibly could. And, oh, by the way, you get a team, with ties to the area, with ties to the city in the game. I was thinking about this from a media standpoint. The thing that is all fine and dandy, that the 60 minutes of the game is it is, kind of what everybody cares about, right? That's 60 minutes, but it's the time leading up to, it's the 2 weeks that we have leading up to the game. It's the week that we had leading up to last week's game. And that's where you get to tell all the stories, right? That's where all the stories come out about, the teams, the players, so as a media, as a media member, really what you're hoping for, if you were covering this or, talking about it like we are, is good storylines and stories that you can tell that will pique interest, that will keep people engaged with what you're telling. And while I think that, obviously having Kansas City and San Francisco, like those storylines in themselves are really good. The Patrick Mahomes storyline of, trying to become the next one, or trying to shake the monkey off their back from previous failure, trying to get back to the promised land. The 49ers of, you have essentially the quarterback in waiting, but this other quarterback has gotten you there. So those would have been all fine and dandy, and 2 proud franchises, one with more franchise success than the other. But I think equally for the younger viewer, younger, fan, these two teams, I think, will engage more people because it is something different. It's not, the old guard with San Francisco. It's not, that historic franchise. It's not, Patrick Mahomes dominating. And while I know there are a lot of young Patrick Mahomes fans, there's a lot of kids that like the Rams because of their cool colors and their cool uniforms. There's a lot of kids that like Cincinnati because of their cool uniforms. And, oh yeah, they have, Joe Burrow, and he's still a kid, that's basically what it is. So the stories leading up to it, I think, as far as an NFL or NFL media standpoint, when you're trying to keep your name out there, given the fact that they do have the Pro Bowl's this week, but who cares, right? Who gives a rip about the Pro Bowl? But like, you have the stories to tell to stay in the spotlight. And then on top of that, you get the greatest to ever play the quarterback position. And we can debate that if you want. I'm going to call him the greatest to ever play the quarterback position.
I don't know that there is much debate on that one.
For sure, the most successful to play the quarterback position. We get the whole will he or won't he, and then that kind of gets put to bed on Saturday, but then it doesn't get put to bed on Saturday. And then today, on Tuesday, as we were recording this, it's finally official, right? Tom Brady has retired. So there's the NFL again. And I'm sure that the NFL probably really would have wished that he'd have held out for another day, because then they get slapped with that lawsuit from Brian Flores in the afternoon. And to me, guys, it is so incredible that even when there is nothing happening in the NFL, it's still the number one topic of conversation on every sports talk radio, every podcast that covers football. I mean, it is incredible how much the NFL is at the forefront of America. Like that, I mean, that's just what it is, right? Like, they used to say baseball is America's pastime. No more. If you guys looked at the ratings from Sunday's Chiefs Bengals game, did you guys see those ratings at all? What the TV ratings were?
Not seen them yet.
They averaged almost 41 million. I think it's 41 million viewers was the average at one point, and it peaked up near 60 or just above 60 for an afternoon game on a Sunday in January in the AFC Championship round, which, by the way, this is normally when we would be in Pro Bowl week. Right now, I've got memories from when I was in Minnesota for Super Bowl 52. And that was, that was this week. So it is just incredible that the NFL has been able to stay at the forefront, even on a week when nothing was really supposed to be happening. The ratings are insane. Like, people in this country love the NFL. No matter what they tell you, they love the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, and then I know we need to get into it, but one of the coolest stories, and I don't know how much run this will get, so I'm going to share it now, and then we can move on. A position that we don't really talk about on this show ever is punter, right? It doesn't have anything to do with fantasy unless you are in some crazy scoring league, which I am not a part of any that use punter or yardage or anything like that. So it's cool. But the Cincinnati Bengals punter, Kevin Huber, I believe his name is, has been in the league for 13 seasons. All of them played in Cincinnati. What's really cool about this guy's story is he was born and raised in Cincinnati. He went to college at Cincinnati and then was drafted by the Bengals and has spent his entire 13-year career with them, and now gets to help represent their special teams in the Super Bowl. Like, it's not a rags to riches story. It's not, crawling, out of, crazy circumstances and overcoming. But this is just a cool story that every young kid, I think, dreams of at some point, right? Playing for your hometown team, right? Playing for the team that you went to those games as a kid, being able to go to college in the backyard there and then doing that and spending your entire career where you were born and raised and everything is so familiar. And you get to be so comfortable and just be yourself the entire time. And even though it's a punter and it's a story that maybe people pick up on it and maybe they don't, I did want to share that really quick because I think it's really cool that he spends his entire life in and representing the city in one phase or another through his playing career. And now he gets the chance to kind of put the icing on the cake with a championship.
I didn't think about it until just now, but like how overshadowed now is University of Cincinnati with the Bengals making the Super Bowl. They go on an incredible run, make the college football playoff, first non-Power 5 school to do that. And now it's like, oh yeah, remember the Bearcats? Like that happened too. One other thing that I'll point out too, Andrew Whitworth, right? The O lineman for the Rams. He's pushing 40 or over 40.
I think he is 40.
And he gets to play in a Super Bowl. And like, how cool
against
is that?
his former team.
Sure. Like the stories are endless. And as a media member, like that is what you hope for. You hope for the best stories. The game is the game. The game will play itself out, and the game will be its own story. But leading up to it, the job becomes so much easier, and it just becomes so much more enjoyable when there's a good story to tell leading up to it. And there is no shortage of good stories when it comes to football, and there's certainly no shortage of good stories when it comes to the Bengals and the Rams. And the Rams are looking to be the second team ever to, win a Super Bowl in their own stadium. Like, maybe we might want to mortgage on the Cardinals next year. Like that's what we need to do.
Right. Well, you think about it, how we went through 54 Super Bowls in which there wasn't the home team or the team that was hosting the Super Bowl had not made it, and now we get back-to-back years of it. That's an interesting storyline in itself. One other one that I don't think we touched on was Joe Burrow has the very, very real chance of becoming the first quarterback to win both the Heisman, the college national championship, and an NFL championship. So another just kind of great storyline there. And there's a lot of others that are out there as well. That's going to be very interesting to unfold and unpack. And one of those that, next week when we're going through this, I'm sure we'll be talking about, what our favorite storyline of this past week has been and what the favorite storyline heading into the actual game looks like there as well. So it'll be a lot of fun. Very, very interesting there to see all of that. Real quick, guys, any takeaways on the recap for conference championship week?
Through all the Patrick Mahomes hype, he deserves just as much criticism for losing that game for the Kansas City Chiefs. That might have been the worst 30 minutes of football he's played in his entire professional career. And there's really no spinning it. Patrick Mahomes is not the only reason, but he is probably the largest reason that the Kansas City Chiefs are not being represented in the Super Bowl instead of the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah. You sit there and you think about the fact that they were up 20, the Chiefs were up 21-3 at one point, and the Bengals at one point ripped off, 21 unanswered points on that one. Like, just phenomenal comeback there.
The Atlanta Falcons are going, see, it's not just us. It can happen.
Look, it can happen, everybody.
Speaking of the Atlanta Falcons and another coach that was part of that team and has now failed to be able to hold a double-digit lead in the second half of several prominent postseason games. Kyle Shanahan, right, was the offensive coordinator of that Atlanta Falcons team on that huge comeback by the Patriots. Had a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl a couple years ago when the Niners were there, and then had a double-digit lead over the Rams going down into the crunch time of this NFC Championship game, and just can't seem to put it away. And so, one of the questions I kind of I've got there is how much of that is how much of that is Kyle Shanahan really kind of seeming to get very continuing to be very conservative on a lot of the play calling there throughout the end of that. One of the things that highlights that for me was 4th and 2 in the Rams territory, and they elect to take the delay of game, punt the ball away, and go for that, which I get that on a conservative thinking and a conventional thinking, that's typically the way to play. But however, what we've seen recently with a lot of the analytics and a lot of the more aggressive play calling style, that tends to not work out in favor a lot of times. So I was just kind of curious to get your guys' opinions as far as some thoughts around Kyle Shanahan and some of that, the game calls and management down the stretch in some of these big time games.
I think, trying to put myself in his shoes, I think that the Niners believed they were doing a very good job kind of keeping the LA Rams contained. They had already forced one Matt Stafford interception. They should have had another Matt Stafford interception to kind of seal the game away. They've had their number, 6 straight and 8 of the last 9 or something like that.
Yeah, should have been 7 straight though.
So I guess I understand it. It's a situation where if you have a quarterback that you inherently trust when the game's on the line, then maybe you go for that. But Garoppolo has been known to make that boneheaded play, and he hadn't made one really to that point. So why play with fire? Pin the Rams deep, and they did. They got him at the 3, guys. Like, it's not that they shanked the punt out of bounds or the Rams blocked it and ran it back or it did anything like that. They pinned him at the 3-yard line. Kyle Shanahan, as he is the head coach, does not call the defensive plays. And at some point, you have all these pass rushers and you have this demonstrative front 7 on San Francisco's team. You got to go make the play. And yes, they've been depleted through the secondary all season long, but there's no time for excuses when you're going in a conference championship game and you gave up, 80 yards on that drive and allowed them to tie it up and kind of get the momentum back. And then they went ahead and kicked another one, took the lead. I don't put it as much on San Francisco as much on Shanahan as many do, because quite frankly, that defense let them down and they looked gassed at the end of the game when they needed them most.
Lest we forget, San Francisco sold the farm to get the 3rd overall pick. There is a reason that they did that. Now, I think that Jimmy G outpaced what he was expected this year. I think getting to, and let's be real, Jimmy Garoppolo did not get them to the NFC Championship game, right?
No, but
we're all in
even
agreement.
A couple of years ago, he didn't get him to the Super Bowl either.
Exactly.
He's a game manager, pure and simple.
There is a reason why they went out and got a playmaker instead of a game manager, right? Like that, or what they're hoping will be a playmaker versus a game manager. Now, I think that Shanahan, to Kevin's point, when you have a quarterback that you inherently trust to go out and make a play, you open up the playbook a little bit more. I don't think they had that with Jimmy Garoppolo. So when it comes to play calling, right, you're only going to do you're trying to put your players in the best position to succeed. And if they have limitations, then you also have limitations as a play caller. So I think that there's a reason why they went and got the 3rd overall pick. There's a reason why they're not playing on Sunday. And I think both of those reasons come down to the fact that while Jimmy Garoppolo is a very good and capable quarterback, he's not the one that's going to win you the game.
Facts. Question for you then. What does Jimmy G fetch you on the open market for a trade? If you're the Niners, what are you really hoping to get, and what do you think they can actually get?
You're looking for a first. The guy had right, wrong, or indifferent. Yes, he's a game manager, but he has a Super Bowl appearance. He was really a play away from a Super Bowl victory if it wasn't for an Emmanuel Sanders dropped touchdown, right? And then a serviceable playoff run, right? He didn't do him anything wild and wonderful to win those games, but he didn't do anything inherently bad to lose those games, especially the final 2 with the Packers and Rams. So I think they're looking for at least a first, and if they, I don't think they're going to sit on him because I don't think they want that cloud over Trey Lance's head. But they're not going to accept the 3rd round pick that they paid for him, a couple years ago when they traded with New England to get him. Like, he has increased his value since then. So, I'd be calling Carolina.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I know you guys have had some quarterback turmoil. We happen to have a guy here, and all it's going to cost you is a first-round pick. See if they can get it done.
And here's what John Lynch is going to ask anybody who calls and inquires about Jimmy Garoppolo, and he tells them first round. He's going to ask them, well, what quarterback are you going to take in the first round that you think is going to be better right away than Jimmy Garoppolo?
Well,
Which one do you think in this class, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this class, right? So this is working out very nicely in their favor. Yes, they sold the farm to get Trey, but they also are going to get, I think, at least a decent return on Jimmy because this quarterback class is thin. And by the way, for all of the diehards, the Senior Bowl is starting up right now. Like that happens this week. This is your chance to get in on the talent pool if you're trying to get one up on some of your buddies in fantasy football. If you do the work now and understand who these players are, it makes you better for when they get picked or when they sign to a team, and you have a better overall team, a fantasy football team as we go into next season. But John Lynch is going to ask whoever inquires, okay, if you're going to use a first round pick on a quarterback, who are you taking that's going to be better than Jimmy Garoppolo next season? And that's the question that the GMs are going to have to grapple with if they want to, inquire about Jimmy Garoppolo. That's what they're going to have to grapple with, that question.
Well, and not only that, you then have to get that first round pick up high enough to be able to take whatever quarterback that you're going to be able to get there as well, right? But like that's one of those, even if they don't get a first this year, but they get a first back in 2023, right? Like, yeah, I think that it's all it is only beneficial at that point to him, and at which point you really only gave up 2 first rounders to get Trey Lance to be your franchise quarterback, and that is one of those that is a small price tag when it comes to draft capital to really go out and get a guy that you really envision being the guy, especially as young as he is, being the guy for the next 15 years for your franchise. So I like it. I like it a lot. Any other thoughts from championship week there?
No.
Okay. Well, the big game is set, gentlemen. We've got Cincinnati and the Rams coming through, and quite frankly, all of our postseason picks and preseason picks, we didn't fare very great on those, but we
First
did.
Off, if you had Cincinnati making the Super Bowl in the preseason, you're either incredibly high or a Cincinnati Bengals fan. Like those are the only two rules. Like that's it. Those are the only two groups of people that pick Cincinnati to be in the Super Bowl at the start of the season.
Right. Yes. But yeah, it's one of those two that it's kind of interesting because I remember back when we were doing draft day coverage, right? Back in April, and Cincinnati came on the clock. They took Jamar Chase with the 5th overall pick. And many of us were sitting there going, what in the world are you doing? You got to get somebody to project Joe Burrow. Like, yeah, that's your quarterback. He's coming off of this injury. Everybody that was saying that, little did we know that we don't know what we're talking about at that point because of the fact that, Jamar Chase had a lot to do with them getting to this point and changing that offense to be very dynamic and being able to bring this thing to the point where it's a Super Bowl berth, the first for the Bengals in 30 years. The Rams are back here again after a few years not being in the dance with pretty much a very different roster through it. And again, you talk about a team that went out and the Rams, if nothing else, have shown that you don't necessarily need first round draft picks to go out and put a team together to make it to the Super Bowl because they just gave everything, they gave so much draft capital away to bring in some of these veterans and bring in some of these guys that are having very big impacts on that team and on that roster here. But guys, real quick before we kind of get into some of our FanDuel recap and all of that, what are some of the kind of early thoughts that you're looking at on this game?
Yeah, I think this game goes an awful lot like the Kansas City game went for the Bengals. Like I see the Rams kind of getting on them from the start. Cincinnati's has not started very quickly in these playoffs, outside of the Raiders game where they started quickly and then kind of held on towards the end. So I think the Cooper Kupp and Matt Stafford connection is going to be real, but I do think that they play them similarly, to how they played Kansas City. So I do think that that's an advantage for the secondary for Cincinnati. And that being said, at the end of the day, I think it is going to come down to defensive line play. And when you have Aaron Donald and Von Miller and Leonard Floyd, it's hard to come up with a better defensive line in football right now. So I like the Rams by 3, but I think this is going to be a really entertaining Super Bowl and one that people should just enjoy for the sake of the game. Lots of star power on both sides, teams that we haven't really seen a whole lot of on the national, this type of stage, right? The Rams made it a couple years ago when they embarrassed themselves a little bit against the Patriots, and it was like the lowest scoring Super Bowl that we will ever see in our lifetime.
3 type of thing, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think that's going to be the same thing. So I like the Rams. I like them by 3, but I do expect one hell of a game.
Yeah, it's hard to pick against them, and I've been picking against, I think, Cincinnati every step of the way. So I don't know if I jump off that bandwagon, the anti-Cincinnati bandwagon. I do think that I agree with Kevin. I think this one's going to be entertaining. I'm excited to see it. But I don't know. I'm not sure yet how I think it's going to go. Check back in with me next week.
I'm sure we may just talk about it, brief mention next week. But yeah, absolutely, Alex. We'll get your thoughts next week on that one. Kevin, I'm kind of right there with you. The Cincinnati Bengals have been a very big second half type of team. And so I could see that one getting off a little bit slower. But if they can keep that thing, within 7 to 10 points type of thing at halftime, I think that they do stand a chance on this one. And I think it's going to come down ultimately kind of who has the ball last is how we're going to see this one play out. So I'm very interested to see this one, and very interested to see a lot of the storylines that are going to be coming out and what that looks like. So let's go ahead and head on over, and we did our DFS playoffs for the DraftKings, and I'm sorry, for FanDuel out there. And Alex, congratulations to you, sir. I know last week you were talking about your woe is you on the FanDuel there, but you brought home the title, sir. What was the secret there?
Cooper Kupp. I mean, I think anybody who won anything had Cooper Kupp in their roster. I will say though that I won and I got goose eggs from 2 players. So really, again, not sure what I'm doing. Uzoma getting hurt, I got that notification and I was like, because I wasn't quite paying attention to the game on Sunday. But I got notified of that he was getting carted off the field and whatnot, and went to the locker room. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I told everybody, like, hey, this guy's a great, value play if you don't want to spend the money on Kelsey. And he got 0, a whole bunch of zeros. But Patrick Mahomes was clutch. Cooper Kupp was clutch. Mecole Hardman and Deebo Samuel. So really the receiving core that I had and Patrick Mahomes, that was the big difference maker, I think.
I like it. It was very interesting too to watch kind of the strategies there, because we each picked that very differently on how we kind of saw that one playing out. I thought that Cincinnati and Chiefs game would be a much higher scoring affair, and went with a very heavily stacked roster there, and was looking very good up until that night game started, and you and Kevin both came storming back and got me there. But congratulations to you, Alex, for bringing home the conference championship game there. We've got another game that we're going to be doing for the Super Bowl here, a 1-game deal, so a little bit more condensed lineups. Should be a lot of fun. We are doing all of these for fun, for the bragging rights. So if you guys are wanting to play with the boys here, make sure that you just shoot us a DM on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Let us know, that you want in. We'll send you the invite. You can hop in and play with us. It is free, and come give it a shot. See if you can take the boys down here. But guys, I think that'll wrap that up. Unless you guys got anything else to talk about the FanDuel. Alrighty. Well, let's go ahead and head on into the coaching carousel here. And it's been some interesting moves over the last little bit here, right? You had Sean Payton stepping down. You had Brian Flores breaking the news today with a lawsuit against the NFL and its hiring practices. A lot of different head coaches named out there, with Josh McDaniels going to the Raiders, Nathaniel Hackett going to the Broncos, Matt Eberflus going to the Bears, and I believe I missed one more. Who did I miss, guys?
Brian Doble to the Giants.
That's right. So, what are your thoughts here?
I guess a couple different things. The Vikings are expected to announce Jim Harbaugh tomorrow.
On signing day, no less. He better go. If he doesn't, man, how do you go back to Ann Arbor? How do you go back to Ann Arbor after that?
Yeah, so that's it's all interesting. Josh McDaniels to the Raiders.
All right, hold on. If Josh McDaniels, if he somehow has figured it out and is the head coach that we all kind of hoped he would be a decade ago, if he has somehow figured it out, and that is just another thorn in the side of a Broncos fan to watch that dude have success in your own division, that to me will be such a tough pill to swallow because.
But I appreciated his press conference. I appreciate the fact that he fully acknowledged the fact that he screwed Denver.
Dude, he was 30 years old. How was he supposed
over his skis?
Yeah,
and that he has learned from that and everything else. So I appreciate him acknowledging that. But it's the Raiders, and as a Bronco fan, I'm not allowed to like anything in silver and black. So I hope he goes down in flames. And it'll be interesting to see what he and Derek Carr are able to come up with, right? I mean, Derek Carr is a pretty risk-adverse quarterback. They've definitely had some issues drafting high-character talent as they continue to have to remove first-round picks from their team as fast as they possibly can for one reason or another. So that one's going to be interesting. On the Broncos side, I like the Nathaniel Hackett signing. I like his energy. I like the fact that he was he's kind of the opposite of Vic Fangio, right? Fangio is just kind of that old school, gruff and whatever. And Nathaniel Hackett had some excitement about him. He was happy to be there. He was ready to get to work. And whether that leads towards an Aaron Rodgers deal or not, if it does, that's icing on the cake. But just to have this head coach and his excitement and his ability to take his knowledge as a quarterback coach and offensive coordinator and get these young quarterbacks out onto the field and see how it goes, I am excited about that. And then the one that I wasn't excited. Not that I wasn't excited for them, but the one that caught me a little bit off guard was the Matt Eberflus signing by Chicago. I don't know that I ever really considered him to be a candidate in this year's coaching cycle. And, the Bears hired their GM, who was a former undrafted player by the Bears, going back to the stories, right, for the media. That's a pretty cool story. And then signing the Colts defensive coordinator to be the head coach there. So it's good news for Roquan, right? He is now Darius Leonard. Not that he wasn't already great, but I do think this elevates Roquan. So I like that a lot. And then Brian Dable to the Giants. That place is a dumpster fire, man. Like, he's going to have he has a hell of a mountain to climb because that place is no bueno.
Yeah, I think what is more interesting as we see some of these head coaching vacancies get filled are the ones that are still out there. You know, what is Jacksonville doing? What are the Dolphins doing? I mean, is anybody going to go work for the Dolphins after the report and the lawsuit that came out? Is anybody going to want to go work for that guy who's allegedly offering the coach $100,000 per loss so they can get a better draft pick? I mean, who wants to go work for that guy?
Have you seen the leaked text messages between Bill Belichick and Brian Flores?
Thought he was talking to Brian Dable instead of Brian Flores. Yeah. Yep. That's that. If there is a smoking gun, I mean, I'm not sure how much more of one you can get in the NFL circle, but
right. And the reason that the Broncos, do you know the reason the Broncos are included in this?
because old John and why can't I think of his name?
Joe Ellis.
Joe Ellis, thank you. John and Joe were out partying hard the night before. Hilariously, though, they apparently said that the meeting started on time. They never denied the fact that they were disheveled and smelling and reeking of the party that they had the night before, but they did say that the interview started on time. That was the response that the Broncos gave. They never denied the claims that they were disheveled and reeked of last night's party. But the interview did start on time. So yeah, I think what's more is the spots that are still open and I mean, to have 4, 6, 8, 9 openings in one season, I think is a lot. And there are only, I mean, yes, everybody thinks they can be a head coach. There are only so many qualified candidates out there. I think the Vikings, I think they pretty much have to go with Jim Harbaugh now. I mean, I don't think there's any choice there. You don't agree to terms, and Harbaugh doesn't go take an interview on National Signing Day. And I know it's not the major National Signing Day, but it's still National Signing Day. How do you go back to your campus after you say, well, I was just testing the waters to see what was what?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you do that? So that seems like that's really going to happen. And we'll find out more probably in the next 12 hours, what goes on there. But
are the Texans going to hire McCown? Is it
Josh McCown?
Yeah. Is that who their head coach is going to be?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised by anything that the Houston Texans do at this point. Again, who wants to work for that guy? That's the same situation that we're now learning about the Dolphins owner. There's that and then some when it comes to the Texans ownership or his inner circle that he has. Who wants to go work there? That's the big thing. When you're gonna just think of it as like, if you're applying for a job, right? And you want to go work someplace where A, you're valued, right? But B, like you share common goals with your employer or your boss, and you're trying to, make whatever it is that you're going to go do it the best that you guys possibly can. So who wants to go work for somebody who's always going to underhand you or, not have your best interests in mind? I mean, every single Cowboys coach is, for as much grief as Jerry Jones causes, still a good guy to know. So
right.
At the same time, like the Texans, that they're not, competing for championships. It's one of the most valued franchises. There's not history there. Likewise with the Jaguars or the Dolphins. That hasn't been, not recently. Many kids that are in high school right now, know anything about the Dolphins other than they got Tua. You know, like that's they don't know about the 77 team that 40 years ago, 50 years ago, you know, like we're talking about. So I think that's what are these other teams going to do? That's the big question, because the head coaching candidate pool is getting smaller by the day. And if you don't act now, you're going to end up missing out. And we're going to be talking about your head coaching vacancy, if not next year, the year after that.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's been interesting is since the Sean Payton news released out of New Orleans, I feel like it's been eerily quiet.
I haven't heard
down
anything,
there,
right?
as
Not a
far
peep.
as who they're bringing in, who they're looking at, what their thoughts are, that type of thing. So it'll be very interesting to see what they do. The Dolphins, I don't know if they can find anyone to come near them at this point. I mean, this is going to be a hard job for them to fill after the Brian Flores lawsuit came out, and the Jaguars, they had Byron Leftwich on the hook. Like, they had the guy that they wanted, but he had like two stipulations in their contract. Like, that's what that came down to. There's two things that Leftwich really, really wanted, and the Jags are like, no, we can't do that. What do you mean you can't do that? He's not asking for part ownership in the team. Like, he's asking for a little bit of power in decision-making processes or personnel decisions, and, you know, an extra, you know, bowl of M&Ms on road games in his hotel room or whatever the hell it is. But if he's your guy, pay it. Like, who cares?
Right. I think the other thing that we are now finding out, and I think we might have already known this, but now it's, you know, come to light legally, is that NFL owners, they're not really like an upstanding group of people. I get it. You don't get to be that rich or that powerful without stepping on a few hands along the way. But man, like Bill Snyder or Dan Snyder, excuse me, he's got to be loving the fact that all this attention's getting drawn away from his discretions and misgivings that he has with his whole situation. Which, by the way, I think I saw something. Commanders. Did you guys see that on Twitter?
Yes. So thank you, Joe Theismann, for screwing up Washington yet again.
We might have the Washington Commanders we're talking about next year, but yeah, NFL owners, man, they're not the upstanding, you know, church boys that I think everybody would like they would like to be perceived as.
Yeah, This is not news. This is just thought. We, the three of us, in closed circles, and I know my buddies and I at work have had a similar conversation of Eric Bieniemy.
Mm-hmm.
If the NFL doesn't put this to bed quickly, and if Eric Bieniemy feels like he has had similar treatment over the last 3 seasons, the NFL could be in a bit of trouble if Bieniemy were to make this a class action and join Flores in his lawsuit. Not saying he will. I'm not saying he has any reason to, but I know it sure seems like Bieniemy's been tossed around a lot just to go interview a bunch of places and doesn't even really get a sniff at a second interview anywhere. I think that there's a little bit more credence to what Flores is saying than what anybody wants to give him credit for right off the top, especially the NFL. But they need to be careful. They need to be really, really, really careful. And I hope that this didn't happen just for the sake of everything. But you guys, I have a bad feeling about this one. I have a really bad feeling about this one. And unfortunately, it came at the expense of a guy who was really young in his coaching career, who feels like this. And quite frankly, because he had the nerve to stand up to the NFL, I'm afraid he's going to get blackballed from coaching regardless of what happens after this, which is really unfortunate because I think Brian Flores did a hell of a job in Miami.
Yeah, I don't know who, what to steal a phrase that's probably not appropriate, but it's the only thing I can think of. But, what heads roll in this situation? I don't know. I don't know if it's Goodell. I don't know if does Congress get involved? I mean, it's a private business, right? You can run your business the way you see fit. But what I don't know who gets in trouble. And unfortunately, I think Kevin, I think you're right. The biggest loser in all of this will be Brian Flores, because his career as an NFL coach, I think, will be done just because of how the club of NFL owners works and how those 32 people, 31 people in the city of Green Bay, how they operate. And I just don't think that I feel awful for him because he is a hell of a coach and he deserves to have a shot. And he did do a really good job in Miami, and he shouldn't have gotten fired after this year. After the year that they had where they came back and they were almost in playoff contention. Or I shouldn't say almost in playoff. They were in playoff contention. So I don't know. I'm not sure how this whole thing plays out. It's a black mark, I think, on the NFL's record, which has plenty of black marks already. But it is going to be something that will be interesting if it, takes out the commissioner, if it takes out owners. How do people react? Does this change the way that fans view, how they're going to give their money? I know we've said and we've heard, I'm not watching the NFL anymore. Well, look at the ratings for last week and tell me how that's working, because it's not. People are still watching. I even ran into a guy in the supermarket. I was wearing my Denver Broncos Super Bowl champions from Super Bowl 50 because I'd rather live in the past than look towards the future with that franchise. And guy comes up to me. He's like, "Hey, nice shirt. What do you think's going to happen? Will they get Rodgers?" I was like, "I don't know, whatever." And he's like, he's kind of been through it. And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "I don't care who he is if he can win me football games." And unfortunately, that's kind of an attitude that we have as fans, right? Like, that's what it is. But sure enough, people as a collective have a voice. And maybe if something happens here, that voice will be loud enough to warrant some sort of change.
Yeah. Yep. We can certainly hope. So let's go ahead and head on through and talk. This is a topic that was brought up, and this is Alex's guy from way back. Like, Cooper Kupp has been an Alex my guy for as long as I can remember. So
since he was catching passes at Eastern Washington.
Exactly. So Alex, this is your my guy here. So one of the questions, right, when we've been going through and we've been hitting this segment is debate style type of things, topics that typically don't necessarily get a ton of run, or fun topics that, quite frankly, we just want to talk about because they're fun topics to talk about. And so, Alex, the question that you brought up there was, is it time to pump the brakes on Cooper Kupp? Right. So in that aspect. I think we need to elaborate on that one a little bit more so to set the parameters of the discussion there. So, is it time to pump the brakes on Cooper Kupp from, are we going to say a dynasty perspective, from a 2022 redraft perspective? How are we pumping the brakes on Cooper Kupp, and what ultimately is the framework of the question that we're looking to dive into?
Sure. So, one of the things that we tell anybody who will listen, if you listen to our podcast, is don't fall into the trap of recency bias, right? Recency bias is something that will get you into trouble more often than not. Think back to this year, right? Who was number one off the draft board this year, even though, we should have seen it coming. We should have seen the fact that, he wasn't going to play all season. He wasn't going to be what we think he is. But our recency bias of said, take Christian McCaffrey 101, right? There are other players that might have got mixed in there, but Christian McCaffrey, for the most part, was a consensus 101, correct?
Correct.
In a redraft league. So when it comes to redraft leagues and you get the chance to, totally reconstruct your roster from year to year, is it time? Is it worth our time to put the brakes on Cooper Kupp and not take him as high as we might? Think back to Stephon Diggs this past year. While Stephon Diggs was good, he was not the player that he was the year previous. Travis Kelce, still good, not the player that he was the year previous. Go back even further, Michael Thomas, right? Michael Thomas, good. And then he got hurt, but Michael Thomas was good, but he was not the player that he was the year previous. So the question is, as you're going into draft season, for others that has started much, much sooner than everybody else, one of the fine gentlemen of the hosts of this podcast, when you're going through your draft, do you need to take a second, evaluate Cooper Kupp this year versus what you project Cooper Kupp to be next year? Because as history will tell us, only twice in the last 20 years has somebody repeated as the receiving yards leader in back-to-back seasons. So it's unlikely to happen again that Cooper Kupp is going to have the statistical season that he had. Never mind the fact that maybe OBJ will be there in that receiving room. Robert Woods comes back and gets healthy. So the question then is to both of you, and I'll chime in as well. When it comes to Cooper Kupp, how high are you willing to spend? What are you willing to spend on him, knowing what history tells us?
I think Cooper Kupp continues to have a fairly safe floor. I think his floor is still somewhere in that 100 to 110 catches, as long as him and Matt Stafford stay connected. I think you are going to see a touchdown regression. And I do think that you are going to see a receptions and target share regression. Yardage, everything else. That being said, he's still a top 5 wide receiver. Like he still is. If I'm in a dynasty league and someone is offering me a haul, like an absolute Christian McCaffrey type haul for Cooper Kupp, I'm probably going to pay attention to it and take it. But in redraft leagues, he's right there, guys. Like, I mean, he's the same age as Tyreek Hill, right? And Tyreek is still, we consider him to be a top 3 receiver. I think Cooper Kupp's right there. I mean, it's what Tyreek, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Cooper Kupp, right? Those are the top 5 wide receivers in the game right now. Before this season, we'd argue DeAndre Hopkins. Some people would try and argue Stephon Diggs. Hopkins, I think he's a little bit long in the tooth. The way Arizona was playing, they're pretty happy spreading that ball around a little bit more. So I do think that his value's kind of not plummeted, but it's just not that true alpha volume that we would like to see. So if you can get Cooper Kupp 3rd, 4th, 5th wide receiver off the board, and that's what you want to anchor your team around, I'm okay with that. I'm not taking him in the first half of the first round, though. Like when Michael Thomas was going, what was he going?
104,
105, yeah. Right? Like I'm not taking him that high. But if I'm sitting at the back end of the first round and, if people haven't learned their lessons on some of these running backs and the running back pull is huge and your big name guys are there, I mean, we've seen you can start you could start a roster, Tyreek Hill and Cooper Kupp, and that'll carry you a hell of a long way in a redraft league. So pumping my brakes slightly, I'm basically resetting expectations, Alex, is what I'm doing. I realize the talent is there. I realize that the volume and the opportunity for success is there, but I am not expecting a repeat of this year's numbers. And I think that falls back into, he finishes somewhere in the top 10 for wide receivers. And to draft him, you're going to have to probably draft him inside the top 5 for wide receivers. So there's little room for error, but I think the passing attack there in LA is going to be prevalent as long as Matt Stafford's their quarterback. So I'm okay taking that gamble.
Yeah, I can definitely get behind what you're talking about there. And yeah, I think I'm kind of right there with you, right? Like when I see him going forward, I think it's a very, you were talking about his floor. I think it's very safe to say that he's going to be in between about the 95 and 110 receptions, kind of in that range there. I think it's pretty safe to say that he'll put up 1,200 yards and between probably 8 and 10 touchdowns, right? Like I think that's a very safe assumption that you can go with as far as what his floor will be. And we've seen, in many years past, that'll get you a top 5 type of performance from a wide receiver, over the course of the year. But it is not going to be what he was this year, right? Where this was his career year and this was the absolute peak that we will see him at. So we're not going to see him, surpass this. I don't see a world, and I can't spin a narrative in which he's going to surpass 1,947 receiving yards and 18 touchdowns. Or I'm sorry, 16 touchdowns. I can't see that one coming through to the point where he's averaging almost a touchdown a game. He's averaging, like Cooper Kupp was one of the very most consistent players in all of fantasy football this past year. That does not happen very often, right? Like you think about even from the quarterback position, it took Lamar Jackson's MVP season for the last time we really saw a very, very consistently good week over week performance from a quarterback to it, right? And those are the guys that score the most points tend to have a little bit less volatility to them as well, right? But it took Lamar Jackson having that kind of MVP style performance. It took Chris McCaffrey in that similar year to have a similar type of consistency from a points in, points out type of game that we saw week in, week out. And I just don't see that happening. But I think to Kevin's point, I think he's spot on there. I don't know that he's going to fall down into like a 4th or 5th wide receiver off the board. I think he's going to be one of those that this coming year, because of what you talked about there too, Alex, with the recency bias, all of that, he is probably going to be the 1 or 2 wide receiver off the board. I don't know that you're going to see anybody. I don't know that you'll even necessarily see him fall to 3rd. Now, the problem with all of that is, say he does where we're talking about and he puts up, 115, 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns, he is going to underperform his draft capital at his draft position on that one, right? Because if you drafted him wide receiver 2, with that stat line, he's likely going to finish wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6, somewhere like that in the season. Now, to be fair, if you're drafting a guy on the top 2, top 3 wide receiver, he finishes inside the top 6, you didn't really get hurt that much by that one, just from the way that goes. Now, where it can hurt you is if you're going to take him in the 1st, 2nd round and he gets you a wide receiver 6 type of finish, and you could have taken a RB 1 through 6 in that range, or you could have taken somebody that's going to get you, potentially more points and a more consistent approach like we typically see from some of these other positions. So yes, I think it's time to pump the brakes on Cooper Kupp, just from the standpoint that I don't see him necessarily being able to live up to or exceed what his draft position will be in redraft this coming year for 2022. But is he a guy that if I'm sitting there in the 2nd round and I can take him as the 3rd or 4th wide receiver off the board, I'm probably going to pull the trigger on that one, even though I just said that, hey, he's probably going to finish wide receiver 6 in that range there. But I think that the connection that he has with Matt Stafford is very real. I think that Rams offense is going to continue to do what we've seen it to do for quite a while there. And the fact that you'll see Robert Woods come back healthy, this next season as well, and they'll get that 1-2 wide receiver punch back. You may see Odell come back as well. Like Van Jefferson taking a step forward on that one as well. All of those guys coming back and doing that actually helps Cooper Kupp more so than if he's the only show out there, from the standpoint that we've seen that, he will get bracketed coverage. They'll try and double team him throughout that. And when you've got those other weapons on the field, it can actually free him up and open him up more so. So, so what?
Tier 1, going back to our tier base, right?
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, every year when we get into our draft specials, we start talking about tiers of players, right?
Uh-huh.
Would you guys agree or disagree that Cooper Kupp is in that tier 1 of wide receivers?
I think I've got to put him in there now. Like, obviously, when we get going into this thing and we start statting things out and I really start doing a lot of my projections, I'll get a much firmer opinion on that one, obviously. But as of now, I think I've got to put him in tier 1 as far as wide receivers go. Go ahead.
So I'm just saying, so in theory, going off the tier-based projections,
right,
it doesn't really matter if your tier 1 is 5 wide receivers. It doesn't really matter if he's the guy you want, if you take him as the first wide receiver or the 5th wide receiver.
Right.
I mean, you expect all these guys to have similar outputs. So
right.
the return on investment is essentially, as long as he finishes in this tier, I get what I pay for.
Yes, I would agree with that.
It's just a different way of looking at it, right? Instead of pinning him in, right, like he's the pick at 1.7, and this is the guy that you need to take, and kind of pinning it in there. Like players, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, based off of his first 2 seasons, and assuming that Jamar Chase is going to continue to elevate his game with Joe Burrow. And
right.
I mean, that's a pretty good tier right there of wide receivers. You have 5 guys there that you feel really confident. And I say Adams, assuming he's playing with Rodgers. If he's not, he slides out. I understand that. But as it stands today, they're both Packers. But yeah, so it's just a different way of looking at it through everything that you and I said. Yeah, I mean, if you look at it in a tier base, which a lot of times we do when we get into things like this, it doesn't matter whether you take him as the first wide receiver off the board or the 5th wide receiver off the board. He fits that criteria for what you're expecting him to be.
Yeah.
Here's another reason that that I brought this up and brought it to our attention. Again, we can only go back. Predicting the future when it comes to fantasy football, while we may try it, it's not always an exact science, right? It is literally trying to predict the future, and you cannot predict when injuries happen, when all these other things happen. When there's a COVID year, we couldn't have predicted that. How many games you're going to miss, with stuff like that. Like, throw that in there. But here is something that is interesting when it comes to past data, and you can only use past data to make an educated guess as to what's going to happen, right? Receiving touchdown leaders dating back to 2007, there has been nobody who has repeated as the receiving touchdown leader year over year. Dating back to 2007, I could probably go even further back than that. Yes. Even to 2002, 2001. Can you guys name the player that might have done that?
Moss.
Great guess, but incorrect.
2002. No, I'm drawing a blank.
Terrell Owens. In 2002, he had 13 touchdowns, down slightly from his 2001 output of 16. But since then, we haven't had anybody repeat year after year. Now, there have been
So you're looking
I take
for
that back.
planes
Just
in
give me
this.
that back. I take that back. In 2009, 2008,
Would have been what,
another
Larry
receiver.
Fitzgerald?
That was Larry Fitzgerald, yes.
Okay.
Who led the league with 12 in 2008 and then 13 in 2009.
So you're
So
looking for
a
planes
one
at
touchdown
this point,
improvement. Now we
right?
talk
Like
about what's that?
yeah. So you're looking for planes, right? And trends. So you want a 5-year sample size. These players
Correct.
consistently find the end zone, right? Like we know Devontae Adams is in there. I think Tyreek Hill's probably in there over the course of the last 5 seasons. Cooper Kupp is towards there, but he did have last season, right? He only had 4 touchdowns, so that definitely takes a chunk out of his number. The 16 this season definitely helps that, but it's just one of those things, right? You're looking for a positive increase or consistency ranking, if you will, over the last 5 years. You're looking for one of the two.
Sure,
Right.
yeah. In 2019, Cooper Kupp had 10 touchdowns. In 2020, he had 3. Now, I say all that to say this, which is becoming one of my new favorite phrases. If you go back and look at receiving touchdown leaders from the last 3 years, it was Cooper Kupp, then it was Devontae Adams, and the year before that, you guys know who it was, in 2019.
Wasn't that Michael Thomas?
Or
no, that was Kenny Golladay.
It was Golladay or
it was Golladay. Who was Galladay's quarterback?
Matthew Stafford.
Yes.
Who has a tendency to hyper target a singular wide receiver, which we also saw with Calvin Johnson back in the day as well.
So basically what I'm telling you with all of receiver position, you are only as good as the guy throwing you the football, right? Like you can only be as good at who will throw you the ball. And what we're seeing based on past data, based on past trends, is that Matthew's history of
the planes of Texas caught up with Alex.
It's like he's trying to talk to me. I know it.
I know. He's making such a good point, too.
He is.
So, yes, receivers are only as good as their quarterback. Alex, do we have you?
I am back. Yes. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, you're good. You were just getting to the climax of your point here, and you froze.
So receivers, they're only as good as the quarterback throwing to them. And what we've seen here is that Matthew Stafford will target a guy. We saw it with Calvin Johnson. We saw it with Kenny Golladay, and now we're seeing it with Cooper Kupp. What remains to be seen is how he handles a 3-headed monster, if it will be a 3-headed monster next year. Should OBJ sign with LA? Should, will Van Jefferson take a step up? Will it become a 4-headed monster there in LA with Kupp, Woods, and OBJ, potentially Van Jefferson? I don't think Matt Stafford's ever had a receiving core like that in his career, a core of 3 really reliable, game-changing receivers. So we know that he can do it when he has the best receiver on the planet in Calvin Johnson. We know that he can make a superstar out of Kenny Golladay because he will target him and find him and get him open in the end zone. Will he be able to replicate that next year with Cooper Kupp? And that's the question. Again, that's the question that we're asking. It's the question that we're all going to have to ask when it comes to what are we expecting out of Cooper Kupp next year? Will he get the same target share? Will he find the end zone, even if it's not 16 times? Because as history tells us, he's likely not going to lead the league in receiving touchdowns next year. And in a position where receiving touchdowns is basically your bread and butter, it's all your bonus points. It's the reason why you take a guy who finished wide receiver 10, but he's got 15 touchdowns. Well, all of a sudden now he's wide receiver 1. Statistically, he would be in the back half of, a wide receiver 1 territory, but with all the touchdowns that he gets, it bumps him up. So that's what you're going to have to look at when it comes to where do I take Cooper Cooper Kupp in a draft. As far as dynasty goes, I don't know that you move off of him. I don't know how you could, unless the offer was real tasty. Yeah, unless the offer was very tasty. Everything has a price, right? We all know that. And when it comes to fantasy football, everything and every player has a price. Whether or not
You
find
know
a
how you
dance
move
partner
off of
to
Cooper
meet
Kupp?
your ask,
You get an RB1, like a legitimate
exactly,
top end
right?
RB1. That's how you move off Cooper Kupp.
Yeah. So that was where the question was born from. Was looking at past history and seeing that receivers rarely duplicate the output and performance when they had a great year the year prior. They rarely duplicate that performance the following year. We just saw one of the greatest wide receiver seasons we've seen in quite some time. And I think it's worth tempering your expectations for what Cooper Kupp will be in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, just to put kind of the exclamation point on that, right? Like when you're talking about that, you're talking about he had a roughly a 31, almost 32% target share of the Rams passes, right? They threw, they had 602 total targets. Cooper Kupp had 191 of those. So 31.7% target share, which is just unheard of. You really don't see that type of target share out there. Not only that, when you also look at his touchdown rate, the amount of touchdowns per target type of thing, he was over an 8%. 8% of his targets went for a touchdown, which is incredibly high, right? Like when you look at the NFL, good players that scored lots of touchdowns this last year were running at 6%, maybe a 7%. 8+% just doesn't happen. So I think it's very safe to say that you're going to see him regress to the mean a little bit more so on that one, to the point where you probably see Cooper Kupp get that 24-25% target share and probably come down closer to about a 6% of his targets being touchdown receptions. So yes, I think it's absolutely safe to say you're going to see some regression, but I do think that Kevin made the point there that you got to put him in the tier, and if he's in the tier of everybody else that you're drafting, if he finishes in that tier, it pays off there. So I like it. Cool. You guys, any other thoughts on this one?
No, but I think we have a discussion for next week, if we wouldn't mind teasing ahead to what we might talk about next week.
So, Kevin, you had the question for next week. Why don't you go ahead and set the parameters for us?
So the question for next week is rather simple, and it is Derrick Henry the next Frank Gore as far as longevity and consistency throughout the next 5-6 years of his career?
I like it. So make sure you're tuning in next week as we go into that one. We started riffing on that one a little bit before we went live here, and
we actually need to riff a little bit more on that one because Kevin has to make a decision here in the next 11 hours and
I'm on the clock in my draft.
Yep. So it'll be a lot of fun, and it's one of those, just judging on how our conversation kind of started there on that one. It'll be a fun conversation next week, as well as we talk a little bit more about the Super Bowl the following week, and get into our discussion topics there. Talk, I'm sure, a little bit about some more coaches that'll be hired and some of the other news coming out here. But guys, I do believe that's going to take us down here to the end of it. Any final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners?
Enjoy the week off.
Oh, there's no rest for the wicked, man.
Well,
pay attention
but I mean,
to the Senior
enjoy
Bowl,
the
to
Senior
the Shrine
Bowl,
Bowl.
but it's not a big DFS week, right? Because the Pro Bowl and things like that. So you can pay attention and watch the specialty bowl games, if you will, but enjoy it. Like, it's not a big gambling weekend. You can kind of sit back and see what props start creeping up, and maybe that's something we look into next week. Also, is doing a segment on Super Bowl props and where we feel your money is best spent.
Oh,
Bring a
I do
little
enjoy.
Bring a little Friday night special into the Tuesday show for the Super Bowl.
I
I
like
do
it. Well,
enjoy some good Super Bowl props.
absolutely. And last year we did play the prop game, and we'll get those props up on our website as well for folks to play along with us and have some fun there as well. Alex, any final thoughts?
Yeah, pay attention to the Senior Bowl if you want to, grind out and find your little draft diamonds, your diamonds in the rough. This is where you earn your hay if you're trying to get one up on your compatriots heading into next fantasy football season. We're always looking for the next rookie, looking for that Jamar Chase that we know, even though we think he shouldn't have been drafted number 5, we know he's going to explode. But also that 4th or 5th round guy that you got to get your eyes on for the first time. I'll give you a little hint. There's a guy that's going to be the talk of pretty much everybody that knows what they're talking about when the Senior Bowl is done. And I only know it because I used to cover him. His name's Christian Watson out of North Dakota State. You'll want to look him up.
All righty, I like it. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Starting to start rookies here very shortly as well. So, guys, that's gonna go ahead and do it. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. All of that good stuff. Make sure that you're following us on the socials: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Good Old Boys FF. Do us a huge favor. Head on over to YouTube, the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast YouTube channel. Click the subscribe button. Ring the bell. Make sure you're getting all the latest notifications when we're going live. For Kevin and Alex, I'm Derek. Have a good one. Be safe.